Last year, I ended with a story that everyone seemed to like, so I'm going to end with another story tonight. So, to my S&E teammates, you already heard this, but too bad because no one else in the room heard it. So there was a woman named Debbie, and Debbie was dating two men. She was in love with two men at the same time, and she just was having the time of her life because she would go on these dates, and neither George or Joe, that were the names of her dates, or her boyfriends, knew of each other. So one night, George takes Debbie to dinner, beautiful fancy restaurant. They're having lobster and they're having wine. And all of a sudden, George gets on his knee and takes out a black velvet box and asks Debbie to marry him. And she goes, "Oh." And she says the sentence that everyone in this room has heard, "George, I have to think about it." So George was devastated, and Debbie and George went home. The next night, Joe took her out to dinner. Another fancy restaurant on the other side of town. Again, wine and lobster and beautiful, beautiful dinner. And then Joe gets on his knee, and he takes out a white velvet box, and he asks her to marry her. And Debbie again was like, "Oh my God, Joe, I have to think about it." So now she doesn't know what to do. So on Sunday, she decides to talk to the only person that she knows that can help her with any of this, and that's her grandmother. So she drives to her grandmother's house, and she's like, "Grandma, I have this awful, awful situation. I'm in love with two men, and both of them asked me to marry them this past couple of days. What do I do?" So Grandma looks at her and goes, "That's easy." She goes, "What do you mean?" She goes, "I want you to go in the living room and close your eyes, and I want you to think about how each of those gentlemen make you feel. How does George make you feel, and how does Joe make you feel? I'm going to go make some cookies. You come in when you're done." So Debbie goes in the living room, and she sits there, and it only takes about 5 minutes, and all of a sudden her eyes pop open, and the light goes off, and she's like, "I know who I'm going to marry." And she runs in the kitchen. She's like, Grandma, I know who I'm going to marry." And she goes, "I knew you would. Is it George?" She's like, "No, it's not." And she goes, "But I thought, George, you were in love. He made you feel great." She goes, "George is an amazing man. Every time I'm with him, he makes me feel like he's the most unbelievable guy in the world. He makes me feel like there's no one better than him." She goes, "Well, why won't you marry him? You're going to marry Joe instead?" She goes, "Yes, because every time I'm with Joe, he makes me feel like I'm the most amazing person in the world."